This episode of the Old Dogs REI Network is brought to you by Mino Studio.
In a world where jobs are how most people make money, one man, one desire, one challenge dares to break the mold. Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where we don't work for money. Money works for us. Coming soon. Viewer discretion advised.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where cash flow is king. Real estate investing, the means, so you can enjoy your retirement dreams. This is the show where we cut right to the chase. No sales pitch, no long monologues, just simple how-to real estate investing advice, so you can earn the passive income you need to enjoy your retirement today. And now, your host and chief old dog, Bill Manacero.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network. I'm your host, Bill Manacero, and this is a show where 50-plussers and anyone else who wants to join us get solid, no sales pitch real estate investing advice to help generate real cash flow. This podcast airs twice weekly on Mondays and Fridays, and if you aren't already a subscriber, go to iTunes, type in Old Dog, spelled D-A-W-G, find our podcast, and subscribe. Well, we've got a fun show for you today. Brian Ellwood is joining us. Brian is a real estate investor who does business in Tennessee while living in Colorado. He has a unique approach in that he has created a system that allows him to fix and flip properties from a distance remotely. Now, Brian's also a buy and hold investor as well. He loves to coach, teaching others how to build virtual real estate businesses in any market while creating a portfolio of low-risk rental properties that generate passive income. Well, this is going to be a great show. I'm really looking forward to it. Welcome, Brian, to the Old Dogs REI Network.
Thanks, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
We're excited to have you on. This is a very interesting topic for me. Just case in point, when I first started getting involved in real estate investing, I was living in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and I was looking at things that I could do in real estate, and the first thing I really latched onto was fix and flipping. But because I was in Haiti, I was going, I don't know if I can do this remotely. I mean, that sounds impossible to do remotely. So I'm real interested to hear, as we get to that point here, how you do this and the whole systems and things that make that work. So, but first, before we get into some of the specific questions, I'd love to just hear your story about how you got involved in real estate investing.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up most of my childhood right outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and went to the University of Tennessee after that, got my degree in English, which, later turned out to be pretty worthless, but moved back to Nashville and got a job in the corporate world for 4 years or so. And like a lot of real estate investors and entrepreneurs, I absolutely hated that world, and I knew I had to do something different. So I quit, and I actually bought my first house kind of right at the end of working at that job. And I got the first time home buyer tax credit. I don't even know if they still do that now, but it was kind of around the time when Obama became president and he initiated that. And so I remember getting like $9,000 all at once, which was the most money I had ever gotten at one time by far. And I thought, oh, this is great. I can quit my job and figure something else out. And that ended up being kind of a bad plan because when you put money into the hands of someone who's never had it, what happens? They spend it all, right?
It's like the lotto winners,
Yeah. So every day I found myself on Amazon looking for something else to buy. But I was also devouring books and podcasts and I had really found my passion for personal development all of a sudden because I knew I needed to do something different. And whenever I blew all my savings, I got a job at a natural market grocery store kind of a place in East Nashville. And when I was there, I was shaking hands of customers that came in and kind of trying to find entrepreneurs and asking them what they did and how they did it. I was really interested in how people earned their own living without having a traditional job. And I also was getting really interested in, finances and investing. I had this little copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Somehow I found on Amazon, and it would fit in my pocket. It was like a tiny Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And so every time I went to the bathroom at the grocery store, I would read a few pages. I was just into this stuff. And eventually I met a guy in the grocery store who fixed and flip houses. He was younger than me, and he always seemed laid back and like he didn't have a care in the world. He was strolling around the grocery store at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday wearing basketball shorts when everybody else is at work. And so, he kind of caught my eye. And after I annoyed him sufficiently, he agreed to mentor me. And the first thing he did was he taught me how to find deals, because that was and still is one of the greatest challenges for investors. And so I started driving around and writing down addresses and sending them yellow letters, the traditional kind of stuff, looking for deals. And eventually I found one, and he had me go over there and take pictures. And it's kind of a funny story I've told before. The tenant was kind of a drug addicted guy who was pretty mean, and he had a pit bull in the front yard that was chained up, and he wouldn't let me in the house unless I left and bought him Burger King breakfast and brought it back to the house.
Seriously?
Yeah. So
wow.
I leave, and I don't have any money, but I'm buying this guy breakfast because I'm desperate to do the deal. And so I got back to the house with a tray of orange juice and coffee and a bag of sandwiches and hash browns. And I remember running through the front yard holding all that stuff just out of reach of that pit bull. And this is all to maybe, I didn't even know what I was even going to be paid if this deal worked out. I just knew I needed to help my mentor out because he was successful, and I figured he'd take care of me. So to fast forward that my mentor did end up buying that house. I kind of put him in touch with the seller once he, got the pictures from me and everything. And then after that, he invited me to lunch and sat me down and whipped out his checkbook, and he wrote me a check for $1,000. And that was a lot of money for me to get at that time, especially considering I'd only probably put a few hours of man hours into this deal. So I was making $9 an hour at the grocery store, and then I just made $333 an hour finding him that deal. And that's kind of when a light bulb went off in my mind that, we're always paid based upon the value we add versus the hours we put in. And so that's when I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and real estate just kind of happened to be the first foray into entrepreneurship, but it ended up being perfect because my passion for creating passive income came very soon after that. And we both know real estate's the best way to do that. So then after that, another couple years went by, partnering with another guy in the Nashville area. We started buying rentals and fixing and flipping. That was probably, 6 years ago. And our business, has grown to the point where we don't have this many employees today, but at one time we had as many as 10 or 11 people working for us, and we're doing, 50 to 100 deals a year. And at this current moment, we've more slowed down. I think it's probably part due to the market conditions. It's definitely a lot harder to find smoking deals when the real estate market is where it's at. So we're maybe doing 5 flips at a time, buying a couple rentals, every month. And I've also really gone heavy into the coaching and education side of things. that's where my true passion is. So that's kind of the long-winded story. I promise not to answer every question with that much detail, but that's kind of in a nutshell, yeah, what I do and where I came from.
Well, that's great information. No, I think that everything you mentioned was something that listeners need to hear. Basically, when we ask people, how you got into it, there's a lot of folks that are listening to this show that are looking at getting into it, and so it's I think one that people can relate to, but at the same time, it shows the progression too. Is fascinating. I mean, that's you were doing quite a volume of. Now, were you doing everything in Tennessee or in the Nashville area as far as your flips?
Yeah, we started in just Nashville, but as the competition grew, we started to expand to all of Middle Tennessee. So it's about 9 or 10 total counties that we focus on.
Okay. Yeah, obviously, it's in terms of your light bulb moment, it was really that first deal when that guy wrote you the checkbook that when sort of ka-ching, this is where I need to be. That's what it sounds like. Yeah,
absolutely.
So, breaking away and going on your own. I mean, I assume you continued working with this guy for a little while, and then decided to kind of branch off on your own.
Yeah, so I probably found 7 or 8 more deals similar to the one that I described, and he paid me $1,000 for all of those as well. I think on my tax return that year, I reported about $9,000 in income. Mm-hmm. So that might be what your first year looks like as a real estate investor if you get started too. But the second, and third, and fourth year, obviously, get much better. But yeah, so probably it was about a year in total that I worked with him as my mentor. And then I got the confidence was the main thing to be able to do it on my own. And then I broke away.
Now, were you involved in all the aspects, the construction, did you actually go in and work on units or at least get involved in that aspect of it?
I didn't. I've never done that. And to be honest, I'm not very good at it. And people think that sounds weird. Like I can't really go into a house and draw up a super accurate repair estimate. I'd probably miss things if you asked me to tell you what's wrong with the house. But we've always focused on putting a good team of people around us who know a lot more than we do about those things and leveraging their abilities.
Gotcha. So in terms of, the typical scenario, I think, that when you find the property, you work with the seller, you strike up a deal, you buy the property, but don't you have to sort of come up with an APV in terms of estimating how much it's going to cost to get that home to that particular number?
Totally. Yeah, we do that. Obviously, we run comps and use a general formula like 70% times ARV minus repairs is pretty standard.
Do you have a person that you bring in to sort of do your repair estimates?
Yeah, the initial one we actually use our acquisition manager for, which is the same thing as a sales rep. It's just the fancy way we decided to call them in the real estate world. But yeah, so the acquisition manager, say a new lead comes in, he will actually run the comp, see about what it's worth, and then schedule the appointment with the seller, go over there and do a repair estimate. We have just a spreadsheet that he follows. It says, hey, if the windows need to be replaced, use this price. If the floor needs to be replaced, use this price per square feet. And so his estimate is rough. It's not going to be nearly as accurate as a real contractor's estimate, but it gives us kind of a starting point because we need to know what offer to initially make. And then the offer is, of course, contingent upon further inspection. And we bring in the professionals at that point. And if we were way off, we may need to go back and renegotiate with the seller. That's kind of how the process looks.
Okay, so you do have that professional inspector that comes in and really looks for the deep down stuff, the sewers, the mechanicals and things like that.
Yeah, we use a professional licensed home inspector as well as a contractor. And a lot of times we'll bring in the property manager too, or the realtor, depending on the exit strategy, because they always give really good advice too. They prevent you from maybe over renovating a property per the way the rest of the neighborhood is. They'll tell you, oh, in this neighborhood, all you need is carpet because it's not that nice. Or in this neighborhood, you need granite countertops because that's what all the other houses have. And so that feedback helps inform the contractor and et cetera.
This is really interesting for me because, most of the flippers that I know have a tool belt. Most of the flippers, at least at one point, they were part of that sort of rehab process. Not all of them were real skilled at it, but they were there, rolling up their sleeves and, bringing in lumber or whatever needed to happen. So it's real interesting that you never really were a part of that process.
Yeah, well, and I have coaching students now that I teach to flip, and the advice I give them is kind of similar to the path we followed. Is when you're learning, don't dive into a project where there's going to be $100,000 in renovation on your first one. In fact, you might just want to do nothing more than paint and carpet for the first 20, and then you kind of figure that out, and then you can maybe add in more and more complex rehabs as you go. But really, to your curiosity about that, I do strongly believe that team building and effective delegation and outsourcing is kind of at the foundation of all successful businesses. They have to figure that out at some point. I'm in a mastermind group with a bunch of other successful guys in this space, some of whom you probably know because a lot of them have other good real estate podcasts like you do. And one of the biggest problems in that group, even among all the successful guys, is that they're completely maxed out. They're trying to do everything themselves. Maybe they're making $1 million a year in gross revenue, but they're working 80 hours a week for it, and they won't let go of anything. And they're still visiting every property themselves. And they're about to drop dead, basically, from their workload. And I've just never been that way. I just don't want to work that hard for money. I'd rather find out how I can work smart. And even if it means giving away some of that money to other people to help me do it, I'm willing to do that.
That's neat. I like that. I like your approach, and I think it's also good that you're sharing this knowledge with others as you're coaching and working with others. Sometimes it seems a little complicated when I look at it because you have that one option, like you said, just new paint, new carpets, and boom, sell it. But you have a reduced margin at that point. Whereas you add the right things, like what's a stainless steel refrigerator and stove, gonna do to boost that overall value, or what are the countertops, the different types of countertops going to do to boost that value. So it seems like there's a matrix there that you have to work with in order to look at the sort of the maximum yield out of each property. Is that kind of true, or is that how it works with you?
Yeah. So I don't intend to give the impression that I know a lot about expensive rehabs, because we've only done probably less than 10 where we put massive amounts of money into them. And I didn't enjoy any of those because of the matrix that you just described. It's too complicated.
Right.
Scaling a rehab business on that level is one of the hardest things that anyone can do. I only know a few people that have done it. It is possible. So most of the deals that we enter into for flips have multiple exit strategies. So to give you an example, it might be a house that we're buying for $50,000, and we're just going to put 20 into it, and we're going to list it for $99,000 and make 20 on it if it sells. And for some reason, if we screw something up or it won't sell, we just rent it out and keep it for a couple years and sell it later. So that's kind of the model that I've fallen into over time, is instead of sticking my neck out there and risking everything that I've worked for, I'm just going to enter into a deal that if it doesn't work out with plan A, then there's always a plan B that will work out, and then you're protecting yourself.
Well, it's good you mentioned the buy and holds, because I do have a question on that too. you mentioned that you do buy properties to hold. Is that sort of always a temporary thing where you're sort of waiting for the market or waiting for other factors? Or do you have a long-term strategy for your buy and holds?
So that's a great question, because as I learn more about real estate and kind of do this longer and longer, I realize that buy and hold is the most important part of real estate investing, and creating passive income is ultimately all that matters, at least to me. But when I started out, it was about the quick deal, the cash, right? Oh, $20,000 in my bank account. That's exciting. I want that. And that's kind of what I went after. But that's a business that you run and you work for money, where passive income is money working for you. It's two very different things. But when you use a broad term like real estate investing, like we both do, I have a podcast, you have a podcast, with that term, people aren't sure what we're talking about. And we're really probably talking about everything, but there's a big difference between those two approaches. So really nowadays, if our acquisition manager brings a contract to the table, our first intention is to try and keep the property. And if we can't keep it, if there's no way to find the money or if the numbers don't work, then option B is we'll see if we can flip it or assign it to another investor for a fee, or maybe just back out of it altogether. So the main plan is passive income. It wasn't always that way. And if I could go back in time and start over, that's all I would focus on really from day one, is just building passive income. Kind of sounds like what you did when you got into real estate, just judging on the bio that I read about you. And so yeah, passive income is everything to me nowadays.
That's great. It's yeah. I mean, you're young, and you've also got the energy. The generating the cash through flips is a natural, for you. It seems like. But yeah, for the long term play, at least in my term, which my longer term, my term is not as long as your term. Let me put it that way. We're looking at something that that strictly is a cash flow producer, and that's sort of our long-term strategy, not only, to get through retirement, but also to have that legacy to hand down to your kids and so forth. So do you have like a goal in mind on your buy and holds, like how many doors or anything like that?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. When I coach students, I make them come up with their number, as I call it. Say, what's your number, right? What amount of money do you need coming in every month or every year to where you could do everything you wanted to do without working? And, what I discovered and what a lot of people discover is that number is not even as high as you might think it is. Like, you don't need $1 million a year to live an awesome life, or even half of that. Maybe out in LA where you live. No, I'm just kidding. But Colorado's a little cheaper. Not as cheap as Tennessee was. But yeah, my goal is probably to have somewhere around 75 to 100 single family houses. And I think at that point I'd be making, a healthy $200,000 or $300,000 a year without lifting a finger. And then beyond that, I don't really see the need for much else. I just would continue to do what I'm passionate about, which is teach and educate and coach others. I am very interested in getting into multifamily. The more I watch people do it, I know you do it, the more I watch people do it, it looks like an easier path to what I'm describing than buying 100 single family houses. But I'm in the habit of doing that because it's what I've done, since day one. So it's kind of hard to break off from that.
Well, you've got something that works too. I mean, you've done it and you know how to work it. I mean, that's part of the game, right? Real estate investing is a broad area. You've got deeds and liens, and you've got, you've got the fix and flippers. You've got, those that are strictly passive investors that are investing in syndications and REITs and things like that. So, yeah, it is a broad spectrum. But it sounds like you found a niche that works real well for you, at least for now, for sure. But making that move is a pretty huge thing. I mean, working with somebody who's got the whole thing, down. They've been doing it for a while. Then breaking off on your own. I'm sure that you encountered, your struggles in there too. And what would you say was sort of your biggest mistake in putting all this together to make it work?
Yeah, probably. The one that really sticks out in my mind is at our time when our team was the biggest. I told you we had 10 or 11 employees and we had a bunch of stuff going on. We kind of just didn't manage people effectively, and we assumed that they were following the systems and processes. It's kind of a common mistake that entrepreneurs make, is they assume that everybody knows what they want without them telling them. And so we bought probably 3 or 4 houses all around the same time that somehow all had foundation issues. And so each one took a good $20,000 hit to our bottom line. And we ended up losing money on, I think, 3 of them and maybe breaking even on the 4th one. And that really just disrupted everything. I mean, it ate up so much of our time just trying to get these deals closed. Wasn't something we had dealt with before. We didn't really have that process where we bring in the home inspector like we do now. And the home inspector will often, if they spot something on the foundation, their qualifications only go so far. It only takes a week or 2 to become a certified home inspector. It costs $1,500. I don't know if you knew that, but it's an easy thing to become. Mm-hmm. So there's all different levels of skill that you get when you hire a home inspector. You should hire someone who has a lot of experience if you can, but they'll spot something in the foundation and say, I recommend that you hire a structural engineer to check this out further. And they did recommend that on at least a couple of those. And we ignored that advice because structural engineers cost $700 and they take 2 weeks to get over there. And we just assumed, it'll be fine. I don't know why, but I think it came down to ineffective management, because when we looked into it, we have a team member that we call our, what do you call them? Just like the person who is on site looking at the property every day, kind of boots on the ground person that goes over and manages the contractors. And that team member was only going to the property, once every 3 weeks. And we thought they were there 3 times a week. And just telling our in-house guy, who kind of oversaw all our deals, of what was going on. And he was telling me. So I believed him and he believed her. And it was this chain of miscommunication that was kind of stemmed from me. I do believe that all problems in the business kind of start with the owner. And so, yeah, now we do a lot more due diligence and we inspect what we expect of our team members. And that's kind of the lesson we learned from losing all that money.
Yeah, I think the best place your education comes from is really once you roll up your sleeves and you're actually doing the work. And yeah, sometimes those lessons are hard, but boy, it really does make a difference for your future and re-honing your business to be able to generate, a significant profit. But one of the things that kind of comes to mind too is, when you're operating remotely like you are, I would imagine that the staffing element of your business is really key. Just holding people accountable, making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. I would imagine that aspect would be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a learning curve for sure. And another thing that we've kind of realized is that being a great leader and being a great manager don't often go hand in hand. Really interesting thing that I heard, and I'm really kind of excited about now, is that there was a kind of a study done on the most successful businesses that have ever existed. And the same thing was looked upon because they do an Entrepreneur of the Year award. This company called Ernst & Young.
Sure.
They had 65 entrepreneurs they were considering last year for the award or whatever. And both in companies like Apple or Microsoft and in all these Entrepreneurs Year companies that were up for this award, they found that every successful company had what they call a pair of leaders at the top, a unique combination of two people that made the business successful. It's like the Steve Jobs and the Steve Wozniak, or the Henry Ford and James Cousins.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them's the visionary and one of them's the integrator. Or put another way, one of them's the starter and one of them's the finisher. So the finisher or the integrator is the kind of systems and processes oriented person who is really good at managing and make sure the trains run on time every day and everything's getting followed. Whereas the visionary is the dreamer and the idea generator and the key relationship builder, the one with the passion and who's excited and all that. Even the guys that founded McDonald's, there was two of them, and they had this same dynamic going on. And so I'm the visionary type. And for most of our career, we never had the integrator type, the manager, to oversee what everybody was doing, because it doesn't interest me. When we get to the level of nitty-gritty details, my brain kind of shuts off. I hate looking at profit and loss statements and, just little details is when I lose interest. And it's a weakness that I have that has to be filled by someone who's strong in that area. And so that was kind of fundamentally at the core of our biggest mistake that I mentioned earlier. And it's also a big part of what you said, managing people, is acknowledging your weaknesses and partnering with people who can fill those, gaps for you. So it's a really interesting business concept, this idea of the visionary and the integrator and how it's existed in every business that's been massively successful. So I'm really diving kind of full into that now, and I'm getting a lot more done and excited about it.
That's great information. Well, conversely, looking at we looked at the mistake. What would you say would be your biggest success since you've started?
Hiring an acquisition manager was our biggest success, because we topped out at maybe a few $100,000 a year in total revenue for a few years straight when it was just me. And then when I brought on my business partner, we were doing everything ourselves, and we were working sun up to sundown, and there was just simply not enough time in the day when you're being the sales rep for your company, as well as managing renovations and even entering receipts into QuickBooks and all that stuff. You're just going to run out of time. So we hired a coach. His name's Joe McCall. He's kind of known in the podcast world and all that.
Yeah, I know Joe. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I figured you probably knew who he was. And yeah, great guy. He was our first ever real estate coach, and he took one look at our business and he said, "Guys, you need an acquisition manager." And I remember being really resistant to that advice, but we took his advice, hired a guy, and literally within the next 12 months, we were doing $1 million a year in revenue, because we had a guy who was meeting with sellers, making offers, looking at deals all day, every day. So he was constantly grinding to find the next deal. Whereas we only kind of waited for the easy ones and, did it when we had spare time. And so even though maybe he wasn't as good of a sales rep as we were, at least initially, he outperformed us 3-1 just because he was of the sheer volume that he generated with activity all day. So that's one of the very first thing I teach people when they're trying to build a business is to hire an acquisition manager. You might not need one if your only goal is to acquire rentals, but even that, at a certain point, I think it'd be worth paying somebody once your portfolio is big enough. But yeah, that was that moment. And then we kind of realized the power of delegation and said, wow, who else can we hire? What other bottleneck can we remove? And then that's kind of how we built our team. But it all started with that aha moment of the acquisition manager.
God, that's great. Well, our audience is mostly 50 plusers. They are folks that are either sort of in the tail end of their careers and they're getting ready for retirement, looking at sort of the reality of retirement. Should they, what should they do? Should it just be an investment move? Should it be something where they are actively doing something? I don't know how many of them would want to start a job specifically. We've also got folks that are already retired, and maybe they're seeing that the funds aren't really that they have don't really allow them to do the things that they want to do, and so they're looking at other ways to generate cash flow and income. This audience, it's kind of a different group, and using your advice, your experience, what would you recommend to them in terms of what could they do to be able to generate some extra income that maybe wouldn't be all that time intensive?
It's a great question. So the first thing, if I had one of your listeners sitting in my office today, is I'd remind them of what we kind of touched upon earlier, that in the whole world of real estate investing, there's a lot of different things you can do. And so you need to pick the thing that is going to give you the best chance of reaching your desired outcome versus just going after one shiny object after another, which is what a lot of people do when they get in real estate, and they change their focus every 3 or 6 months. So first of all, realize you can either build a business that flips properties to generate cash, or you can just focus on growing a rental portfolio that's not going to really start out super sexy and lucrative at the beginning, but over time, that's going to give you a better chance of having a higher net worth and more mailbox money coming in every month without working. You can do both, but you need to really decide which one is for you up front. And then based upon that, and if you can't figure that out, I use this exercise with my coaching students called your perfect day. You write out your perfect day, forget about goals and stuff, figure out what lifestyle you want to live on a day-to-day basis. What do you want to do? You wake up, you eat breakfast with your husband or wife. Do you go to work? For how long? Do you work with people or by yourself? What do you want to do when you're at work? What do you want to do after work? What do you want to do that night and the next day? You really need to think about your day-to-day lifestyle that you would love to live. And that should be your starting point for anything else. And you have to make sure that what you're going to do fits in with that. So if someone says, I don't really want to start a business and have employees, and then definitely don't do that. You don't have to do that just because I did that. Just buy rentals, if that makes sense for you. And then the next steps, and I'll just go through them kind of quick, is you'd need to choose what markets you're going to invest in. You got to look at the population growth and the economy in the market. I would definitely find a mentor in that market because that will help you learn everything, get connections way faster. And then you've got to learn the market inside and out. You've got to learn how to analyze deals and how to know a good deal when you see it. And then essentially you've got to find the deals via marketing and connecting with other people, and you've got to find the money to put the deals together. And that's sort of the bullet points on getting into real estate for somebody who's never done it before.
That's great. Great advice. Thank you. I think they could probably use some of the principles that you have in terms of finding below market properties. And, they could buy those as a buy and hold, but if they're buying them under market, they can do a little rehab to get them up and rentable. Then they've got something that has built-in equity, at closing of escrow, which is a real advantage. In economic times where you might have a downturn and, you've got a property that's sort of got that built-in equity, which buffers you a little bit from that. So that's a really good advice. Where do you see your business in, 10, 20 years down the road?
So, like I mentioned, as far as owning units, 100 single family houses, and start to buy some multifamily buildings, I think at that point, it would just be more acquiring more units to see if I could do it. I don't think more and more money is going to add to any kind of satisfaction or happiness for me beyond a certain point. So whether or not I grew up past around that mark of 100 would be kind of up in the air. But beyond that, like honestly, I wouldn't care if I ever did another flip again. I'd rather spend my time educating. That's always been my true passion. I originally went to college, wanted to be a college professor. I like to teach. As soon as I learn about something, I want to turn around and tell everyone about it. And I annoy people at the dinner table all the time about stuff that I'm reading. They don't care. And so I know that this is my true passion, is helping other people achieve the same result that I've achieved and am going to achieve in my career. And of course, making money doing that. That's where I would see myself down the road.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And you've got already this remote thing wired. So, you can still run a business without having to, be there. And that's kind of neat aspect too, which gives that passive, a certain degree of passive involvement there. This is the time in our interview where we do what we call a wrap it up session, where I ask you a series of quick questions and you respond with information or resources that our listeners would be able to latch onto and maybe help them in their real estate efforts. So if you are ready, we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Let's do it.
All right. Favorite real estate book?
Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller.
Great book. Great book. Favorite business book?
Rocket Fuel by Gino Wickman. The entire book is about the visionary integrator combination that I described earlier.
Oh, good. I'm going to read that. You got me going when you talked about that. It's great. How about most valuable website for success, other than your own, of course?
Facebook.
Oh, really? Interesting.
I know. And I'm not kidding either, because I feel like it's one of the most useful tools for connections and marketing. I mean, anybody on there, you can shoot them a message and they'll probably reply. So you can build relationships there, and marketing via Facebook has become the most popular thing there is today as far as marketing goes. So I think Facebook is a gold mine. I think there's over 1 billion people on it now, and you can target demographics like crazy. So yeah, that's why I chose Facebook. It can also be, of course, the biggest time waster on earth too. So you got to be careful.
Exactly. How about favorite app?
Slack. Are you familiar with Slack?
Nope, I'm not.
So Slack is kind of a replacement for email for communications within your company, but it's much better than email. It's sort of like a way where you can go back and search conversations and find things that, happened a year ago very easily. You can add attachments. You can do webcam calls inside of Slack. It's kind of what most businesses are starting to switch to, and it eliminates email for internal communication with your company, at least. All that back and forth, and you're having to go search your email and look in the trash folder trying to find that one conversation from 2 years ago. Kind of eliminates all that, but I definitely recommend just everyone download it and just play around with it a little bit, and you'll kind of get a better feel for it.
Great. How about your favorite quote?
Yeah, there's always a correlation between diluted focus and a diluted bank account.
I like that. That's great. And our final question: if something catastrophic happened and you lost absolutely everything except $1,000 in cash, what would you do with that $1,000 to rebuild your real estate business?
Okay, so if I only had $1,000, I wouldn't spend any of it on the real estate business because I would need it to live. But if I had it to spend, man, what would I do? I still probably wouldn't spend it because it's too small of an amount to have a big impact. What I would do is build a list of private money lenders to loan me the full purchase price of rentals. And then I would go out and find the deals. I'd look to realtors and wholesalers and property managers. I'd build a list of just a network that I could email or call regularly and say, hey, do you have anything I'm looking to buy? And then I'd be backed by private money lenders who I could get the full purchase price from. And I would just simply piece deals together. I mean, I do that today. We're closing on one tomorrow and another one in 2 weeks that are being funded by private money. I'm not coming out of pocket for the closing costs or the repairs. Yes, they are discounted deals that I had to find. But, in hindsight, I realized after doing all this work to find deals and earning all this cash to buy deals, once I found them, I didn't need to do either of them. The money is there and the deals are there. It's just on you to put them together. And then you're the one that takes the risk by taking title. And that's what makes you an investor. So that's essentially what I would do if I had to start all over. And I don't think it would be too difficult.
Wow, that's great advice. Great advice. And that's really what real estate is all about. It's about relationships. And, again, there's relationships on a lot of different levels, but, it's bringing people together in a unified goal and everybody's sort of benefiting. So that's great. Great. Man, I could stay on the phone for much longer with you, Brian, if I didn't have to go. But I am totally stoked on the information you provided, your story. I'm sure there's people listening that would love to be able to, get a hold of you and find out more about what you do, and maybe about your coaching, maybe about other elements of your activities. What's the best way for folks to reach you?
Sure. There's a few things I'll throw out there, and you can choose whatever you like. I do have a podcast that was recently launched just a couple weeks ago. There's probably 5-10 episodes up so far. It's called Virtual Real Estate Investing. I also wrote a book on how to hire your first acquisition manager, and I'm giving away that book for free at fireyourself.net. That's fireyourself.net. And lastly, I teach a free live webinar every Thursday evening on how to do all the stuff we just talked about in this podcast. And you can just register for that for free at virtualinvestingclass.com.
Great. Oh, man, they get a free book on top of it. That's excellent. Oh, great. Well, gosh, I thank you so much for being on. But, as you know, we are a little different than other real estate investing shows in that we have a requirement of our guests at the end of the show where they have to howl. Now, you're from Colorado, actually Tennessee, but I mean, both states have their share of dogs out there and probably some hound dogs, hunting dogs, things like that. Okay. So, this is your chance to really just share with our listeners just your real skills. Okay. In giving us your best old hound dog howl. Are you ready for that, Brian? Ow! Oh, that was good. That sounds like a guy from Tennessee. Well, thank you so much for being on, Brian. Really appreciate it. Great information too, because it's real funny. If I would have probably met you, a few years back when I was still in Haiti, I'd probably be flipping now, because you've dispelled all of my fears about doing it remotely. But great stuff. So thank you for being on, Brian.
Enjoyed it, Bill. Anytime. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you bet. And thanks to all of our Old Dog listeners out there, too, for joining us. I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing right now, but the fact that you've taken the time to listen to us means a lot, and we greatly appreciate it. Please note, everything that Brian talked about here will be in our show notes, okay? And our show notes are located on our website at olddogsrei.com/blog, and you'll be able to get links. You'll get reference. You'll be able to link onto the page to get the free book and all the other great stuff that he mentioned too. So that's the place to go. That's the show for today. Remember, cash flow is king and real estate investing the means. Until next time, keep moving forward and may God bless.
Thank you very much for visiting the Old Dogs REI Network. We would greatly appreciate if you would stop by iTunes and let us know what you think of the show. We would love if you could subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. The more ratings and reviews we receive, the more visible the podcast will be to others. Thank you.